Between the 11th and 12th of August, Colombia's Puracé Volcano recorded 6 new ash emissions, the highest reaching 500 meters above its crater, keeping the volcano under an orange alert as authorities strengthen emergency plans in nearby communities. Social media has been full of videos claiming the volcano erupted because of the massive earthquake that struck Colombia just days earlier, and it is easy to see why that story spread so fast, since both events made headlines on the exact same day. Here's what the Colombian Geological Service, the agency actually monitoring this volcano second by second, says really happened. Puracé's ash emissions did not start because of the earthquake. They started 3 weeks before it. This is the story of what has actually been building beneath Puracé since late July, why scientists are confident this activity is unrelated to the earthquake despite the coincidental timing, and what the current data says about where this volcano's unrest could be headed next. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the Colombian Geological Service has actually confirmed. Drop a comment and tell me if you have ever hiked near an active volcano, because Puracé is a popular hiking destination that authorities are now actively warning people to stay away from. I read every one of these. If you want grounded science coverage built on verified monitoring data instead of viral misinformation, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need the accurate version of this story. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now let us get into it. The actual timeline matters enormously here because it is the single clearest piece of evidence against the earthquake theory circulating online. The Colombian Geological Service first reported eruptive activity at Puracé beginning to increase on the 20th of July, 3 full weeks before the earthquake struck. By the 1st of August, the seismic network monitoring the volcano had already recorded a clear intensification, an increase in continuous volcanic tremor, and in signals specifically associated with ash emissions, prompting the agency to raise its alert level from yellow to orange that same day. Between the afternoon of the 9th of August and the afternoon of the 10th, the volcano produced 5 separate ash emissions, the highest rising about 700 meters above the summit, with SOMI visible directly from nearby communities in the Cristales and Alto Anambio areas. The earthquake itself struck at 7:34 that same morning, meaning the volcano was already actively venting ash before the ground even started shaking. The Colombian Geological Service addressed this directly and unambiguously, stating plainly that the 2 events were independent, and separately confirming that monitoring showed no additional change in Puracé's behavior that could be attributed to the earthquake. It is worth taking the underlying science seriously here rather than simply dismissing the idea outright, because earthquakes triggering changes in nearby volcanoes is a real documented phenomenon. Volcanologists do study, generally called dynamic triggering, where the passing seismic waves from a large earthquake can, in some documented cases, disturb fluid-filled magma chambers or hydrothermal systems, enough to nudge a volcano that is already close to some kind of threshold. The reason scientists are confident that is not what happened at Puracé comes down to exactly the kind of monitoring data that makes this channel possible to fact-check in the first place. The volcano's seismic signature had already shifted meaningfully before the earthquake, showing continuous volcanic tremor and long-period earthquakes, tied to the movement of fluids beneath the crater, most occurring less than 1 kilometer down, alongside a separate, less frequent set of signals from actual rock fracturing at slightly greater depth. That is a signature scientists associate with a volcano's own internal system, evolving on its own timeline, not with an external jolt from a distant, deep earthquake, more than 100 kilometers below the surface and a meaningful distance away. The chemistry and physical data coming out of Puracé over the past several weeks paint a consistent picture of a volcanic system that has been genuinely changing, independent of anything happening in Chaco. Sulfur dioxide emissions have remained above the volcano's established baseline average, at one point peaking at roughly 4,200 tons per day, while carbon dioxide levels measured in the surrounding soil have continued climbing, reaching concentrations around 688 parts per million. Some of the ash and gas emissions recorded in early August rose as high as 3.4 kilometers above the crater rim, with ejected material measured at temperatures up to 140 degrees Celsius, and ground deformation has persisted across the broader area connecting Puracé to 2 neighboring vents, Piacolo and Curiquinga, that make up the same volcanic complex. None of that data traces back to the 10th of August. It reflects weeks of monitoring the Colombian Geological Service had already been tracking closely before the earthquake ever became part of this story. Independent fact-checkers in Colombia reached the same conclusion the Geological Service did once they examined the viral claims directly. Reviews of the social media posts alleging the volcano erupted because of the earthquake found the claims misleading, noting that while Puracé has genuinely been active and under orange alert, that status had been in place since the 1st of August, more than a week before anyone connected the volcano to seismic events in Chaco at all. That kind of rapid, unverified narrative spreading during an active national disaster is itself a pattern worth understanding, since a country already managing a major earthquake response benefits considerably less from a second, misattributed crisis narrative competing for public attention and emergency resources than it does from an accurate account of two separate, genuinely serious situations unfolding at the same time for entirely unrelated reasons. Puracé itself sits within a broader volcanic system worth understanding on its own terms, rather than only in relation to the earthquake. The mountain rises more than 4,600 meters, or roughly 15,250 feet, making it one of the more prominent peaks in Colombia's southwestern Cauca department, and it forms part of the Los Coconucos volcanic chain alongside its two neighboring vents, Piocolo and Curiquinga. Historical. Records show the volcano has produced periodic explosive eruptions repeatedly over centuries, with confirmed activity recorded as far back as antiquity and recurring through the 18 and 1900s, including a notable eruption in 1977. That long, repeating history is part of why Colombian authorities maintain a permanent, dedicated monitoring network around Puracé specifically, rather than treating this year's unrest as an unprecedented surprise requiring monitoring infrastructure built from scratch. The practical consequences of this ongoing activity have been real regardless of what caused it. Ash from the volcano forced the temporary suspension of operations at Guillermo Leon Valencia Airport in nearby Popayan, adding to an already chaotic week for Colombian aviation given the earthquake's own separate damage to airports across the west of the country. As of the 12th of August, the Washington Volcanic Ash Advisory Center was still tracking sporadic ash plumes from Puracé, reaching as high as 18,000 feet, describing the activity as mild but continuing intermittently. Authorities have specifically warned residents and visitors not to approach the craters of Puracé, Piocolo, or Curiquinga, since sudden gas or ash emissions dangerous to anyone. Nearby can occur with little to no warning, a genuine concern given that Puracé sits inside a national park and is a well-known hiking destination that draws visitors regularly, prompting the United States State Department's own Overseas Security Advisory Service to issue a specific alert about the area on the 1st of August. So what does the actual science say about where this goes from here? And this is worth being honest about rather than manufacturing false certainty in either direction. The Colombian Geological Service has been explicit that it does not have a timetable for larger eruption, and that officials are not relying on any single measurement in isolation, instead tracking changes across the entire monitoring network together, seismicity, gas output, ground deformation, and ash production, before drawing conclusions about where the volcano's unrest is actually headed. That approach reflects a genuinely difficult reality in volcanology more broadly, that elevated activity like this can persist for weeks or months without ever escalating into a significant eruption, just as easily as it can be an early warning sign of something larger building underneath. Puracé itself has a long historical record of periodic explosive activity, with its most recent confirmed eruption in 2023. And researchers studying the current unrest are treating this specific episode as one more data point in that longer pattern rather than an isolated, unprecedented event. So what does all of this actually mean for you, whether you live anywhere near Cauca Department or are simply trying to understand how two major geological stories in Colombia ended up colliding in the same week? The practical lesson is that a striking coincidence in timing is not the same thing as a confirmed cause and effect relationship. And the agency with direct second-by-second access to Puracé's actual monitoring data has been clear and consistent that these two events are unrelated, based on a timeline that simply does not support the viral version of the story. That distinction matters beyond just getting the facts straight, because treating unrelated disasters as connected can distract attention and resources from what each event actually requires on its own terms. An earthquake response effort still searching for missing people in Chaco, and a separate volcanic monitoring effort in Cauca, watching a system that had already been changing for weeks before anyone was paying attention to it. The honest, grounded summary is this: Puracé Volcano's ash emissions began intensifying on the 20th of July, prompted an alert upgrade from yellow to orange on the 1st of August, and had already produced 5 separate ash emissions before the 7.4 magnitude earthquake struck Chaco on the morning of the 10th. 6 additional emissions followed on the 11th and 12th. The volcano remains under orange alert, and the Colombian Geological Service has repeatedly and directly stated that this activity is unrelated to the earthquake, based on a seismic signature and a timeline that clearly predate it. The volcano's underlying chemistry, rising sulfur dioxide and soil carbon dioxide, persistent. Ground deformation and continuous tremor tied to fluid movement beneath the crater shows a genuinely active system that scientists are continuing to monitor closely, without a confirmed timetable for whether this unrest leads to a larger eruption or gradually settles back down. We are going to keep tracking this exactly the way we tracked it today, straight from the Colombian Geological Service and the actual monitoring data, not viral social media claims. Subscribe so you do not miss how Puracé's activity develops from here, because based on the agency's own data, this story is very much still unfolding. And leave that comment below. Tell me if you have ever visited or hiked near an active volcano, because places like Puracé draw visitors every single year who may not realize how quickly conditions like this can change. Because behind every one of these monitoring readings is a farming community in Cristales, watching ash fall from a mountain they have lived beside their entire lives, and a country already exhausted from one disaster, now being asked to keep a careful, watchful eye on a second one entirely by coincidence. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.